is Charlie. Every week we get together and talk about happenings in the digital asset space from an insider's perspective. How's your week been, Charlie?
It's been good, man. We got it's like 60 degrees and sunny, and which is nice. For New York, yesterday was 30 degrees, a little colder. The day before I wasn't here, I was in Dubai. It was very hot there, 80 degrees, not a cloud in the sky. Got a little sun, but I came back to the cold here. Stoked, it's so nice out. What about you?
Yeah, solid. It's rainy in Austin, but great weekend. Had a barbecue with friends.
Love that.
Living life, you know.
Attaboy.
Navigating the worldwide turmoil that's going on.
Yeah, exactly. Speaking of which,
Yeah, so today we have an interesting episode. We're going to focus on what's been some of the biggest news in the space for the last, I don't know, 4 days. It's a $2 million bet.
love it, dude.
So, yeah, just to give a little background, Twitter is like a breeding ground. It's pretty much where people in this industry and in this space live. It's where a lot of conversations happen. And on March 17th, there was a tweet. I had no clue who this guy was. It's
Oh,
a
really?
pseudonymous account. Yeah, James Medlock. Were you familiar
Yeah,
with him before?
a little bit. Yeah.
I mean, it could be a herb for all I know. Shit.
Yeah. I thought you were gonna say you didn't know Balaji. I misunderstood. I'm sorry. That's why I was surprised.
Oh no, I'd known Balaji,
Yeah.
but this James Medlock, I did some research. I was like, who is this? And there's just on their profile it says tax enthusiast, hyperinflation doubter, social democrat in the streets, market socialist in the sheets, and then a link to a Medium account with one article from 2022. So
Okay.
I don't know who it is,
Neither
but
do I.
this James Medlock person tweeted out a single sentence that said, "I'll bet anyone $1 million that the U.S. does not enter hyperinflation." And then a big player in the space, Balaji. Do you know how to pronounce Balaji's last name?
No, I mean not in a way that I could just spit it out right now, but
Yeah, we'll
Srinivasan.
just say Balaji for now.
Yeah.
So Balaji in the same day responds, "I will take that bet. You buy one Bitcoin, I will send 1 million USD. This is a 40 to 1 odds, as one Bitcoin is worth around $26,000. The term is 90 days." So basically,
That's the craziest
bet,
part to me. 90. Why do you choose those
Yeah.
days? Like what?
I know. So the bet is that the equivalent of uh, one Bitcoin in 90 days compared to now will be worth 1 million USD. And there's some other. I'm assuming there's like a valuation of the USD that's in there as well, but that's the big news.
Yeah.
They took that bet.
So it'd be a
Everybody's been
48,
talking
a
about it.
38x, 38 and a half x is the idea.
Yeah, the price would have to go up 38 times what it is now compared to $1. It's interesting because Balaji's pretty well respected in the space, and it's a huge thing to say in 90 days one Bitcoin will be worth $1 million. And at the same time, he launched $1 million, almost like a marketing campaign that was in the same day. Basically an initiative where he offered $1,000 prizes of $1,000 each for content that would alert Twitter users about this collapse, and he called it the Bit Signal.
Yeah.
So,
As in the bat signal for anybody. Like it's like took me a second when I saw it. It was like just a chart with Bitcoin going really high, and I didn't really understand the reference at first, but it's obviously in reference to the bat signal. So the bit signal.
yeah. And yeah, super interesting. Last thing I'll say is that if he hypothetically wins the bet, the purchasing power of the 1 million USD that's tied up is pretty much worthless. I mean, it would have devalued by 38x. So what he's saying is, even if he wins the bet, he loses a lot of money. But he's basically taking a stand and trying to make points about hyperinflation.
Exactly.
Wild.
And we decided this morning to go into this topic because I woke up to a text this morning from a buddy of mine who doesn't work in this industry, who works at startups, like a few different startups. I've known him for since high school. Really, really cool, smart guy. And he had written to me, which I, honestly is flattered by. I don't think of myself as an expert in really anything, but he was like, "Oh, do you know this Balaji guy?" And he's like, "Do you think that this is serious around?" I don't think that the context of the bet is that clear to a lot of people. I think that what's become really, really like mimetic, to use a term we've used a million times, like something that's really gained traction on Twitter and elsewhere and headline driven, or it's gained a lot of traction through headlines, and is the fact that Balaji is taking $1 million bet on the fact that hyperinflation will manifest within 90 days. And that's like very alarmist, I think. to be really clear off the bat, I'd like to understand whether or not you think that's realistic. I personally don't think it's realistic. I think that this is a marketing campaign that's extremely efficient for Balaji, who is a 100 millionaire plus. He's had many exits from very, very lucrative companies. He's an investor. He's been bought out by Coinbase for a company that he had run. And so he was the CTO at Coinbase for quite some time as a result of that acquisition that had happened. He was a partner at one of the biggest VCs in the world, Andreessen Horowitz, A16Z. More maybe you might know them as that. Serial entrepreneur from entrepreneur in Silicon Valley, really smart guy. He started a podcast a couple of weeks ago. His first guest with Vitalik, who's the founder of Ethereum, which we've spoken about extensively. Really long conversation. I just love the way Balaji thinks. Every time he has a podcast, they're always like 5 or 6 hours, but I always make time for them. I just like his take. I think he's a really important sort of figure in the internet in general. He's just like a big, broad thinker, and he's not really like constrained by a lot of the existing thoughts. I think I just really like how expansive his mind is. He wrote an essay in 2011 called "The Network State," which I had read at the time on Medium, loved it. It's just so interesting. We'll talk more about that. He subsequently put it into a book last summer in 2022, and then more people sort of had reached out to me about it, and so I guess it gained some traction. But I think probably a lot of people don't know that essay in that book. But nonetheless, do you think that this bet, I'm interested to understand your take on, like, do you think this bet is good or bad or what?
Yeah. An important thing, I think, for context is that he tweeted in like January 2020 before COVID and pretty much called the shot of what would happen
Yeah.
with the pandemic.
He's very
And
prescient. He's a very smart guy.
Yeah. And there's a meme, I think it's Balaji called it or something like that, where
Yeah.
a lot of people see him as somebody who's made a lot of predictions that came to fruition, which is one reason I think it's getting a little more traction besides the main number. Personally, to me, I'm not an expert in hyperinflation, and he's been putting out information on it. Irregardless of that, I think it's a marketing stunt for sure. It's a big number. It's getting people to like actually consider and listen. He launched a podcast that he's done 3 episodes now. Not that he's like looking to get more views, but it is like he's a personality and he's making big swings, and he saw somebody say this thing he believes isn't going to happen. He has the money to throw around to make a huge bet, and it seems like a zero-sum game if he has a lot of money already, and $1 million isn't that much at the end of the day.
Table stakes. I mean, it's like nothing. Like, I just don't think it.
Yeah.
And also, in terms of you had made reference to the COVID call you had made. The only reason he has any sort of authority in that is because he actually has a Master of Science in Chemical Engineering from Stanford, and also a Bachelor's, Master's, and PhD in Electrical Engineering from Stanford. The guy's like technically brilliant.
Yeah, smart dude.
Yeah.
But in this space, you see a lot of things like anytime there's a big bet. There's a big bet last year with Do Kwon and another pseudonym. It's always pseudonymous people, but this guy called Algod Trading or something.
Exactly.
Where it was $1 million that Luna, which was the government or one of the tokens in the Terra collapse, would be $100 or $99 over the course of a year, which 3 months later it crashed and basically went to zero.
Mm-hmm.
So when I see big bets like this, a lot of times it seems a little bit like an ego match, but this one is less. It seems less hostile and more based on fundamentals of what they're seeing in the economy, and not as serious. But I think bets are a little bit of a marketing ploy at the end of the day and like an attention grabbing device, a means to an end to get people talking about something that isn't. It's not necessarily sexy to talk about hyperinflation.
Yeah, definitely. I do think it's interesting that a layperson had texted me about this, like somebody who's not in this industry. They know that like I've been writing. They read my essay, they gave me some feedback. They shared with some of their buddies. They had positive feedback. I let him know. It actually, like just by happenstance, the second essay I'm writing, which I'm almost done with, just this travel kind of messes with my body a little bit, is about networks and the internet and how open standards and open protocols are the sort of the foundation of that. It's been really interesting to research in more detail. And so that'll come out this week. Getting really close to hitting send on that. But this sort of plays into that, and I thought that I just thought it was so interesting. So I texted Eric a few screenshots, like, look at these questions. Maybe we should talk about this today. We were going to talk about something else, but I think this is great. So we've already discussed a couple of times, like we had talked about hyperinflation on previous podcasts in relation to Bitcoin's fixed supply, in relation to how when I was in Zambia there was literally 3 zeros taken off of the bills, off of the notes, the fiat note. And then also it's happened in Argentina, it's happened in Brazil. I don't think we mentioned Brazil previously, but we definitely mentioned Argentina. It's not a very well understood concept. I'm certainly not a freaking expert on really anything, but especially economics. But it is something that I'm just like generally interested in and been interested in for a long time. I guess I wanted to like provide context on why. I think there are a lot of armchair experts, and I guess I am one too technically, but I wanted to just explain like why I'm interested in this, not why I'm an expert, but why I have an opinion or have opinions on it. It's like I was born of immigrant grandparents, like from Ukraine and Russia. So like we played a lot of chess and like studied history as kids and like astronomy and stuff. And then that led to me being interested in foreign affairs and then like actually working in foreign affairs for multiple years, living abroad for those years, like learning a language and living in a culture that's completely foreign to the one that I'm in. And also I wasn't really around Americans. It wasn't like I was an expat. Which is obviously, also made it different, but it was a different experience than that. I've traveled extensively throughout the U.S. and abroad. I don't know how many. I don't have like one of those like bios on some like dating app around how many countries I've visited. I have no idea. A lot of them. I've lived abroad in additional years to those years abroad in the foreign service. I speak several languages conversationally, and also I'm internet native, so I have like a global perspective that's more network derived than border dependent. And so we spoke about that in the earlier episode as well. But Balaji like plays really well into my interests. Like I've read, I'd encourage people who are interested to read Ray Dalio's Changing World Order, which Ray Dalio is the former CEO of BlackRock. Maybe he's still the CEO of BlackRock. I'm not actually sure of that. But he had written this book that came out last year that I've listened to on tape a couple of times and read once, the hard copy. It's a thick book and there's a lot of references in it in terms of like the annotations. But really good book about his thesis there is that that China, the nation state, is coming for our lunch in the United States and something we need to be cognizant of. It's sort of interestingly, just playing back into earlier, my grandfather from Russia had actually shared with me when I was much younger a book called China Inc., which I had read as a kid, like I was like a teenager. So I've been thinking about that for a long time. I don't think that's necessarily revolutionary, although it was something that a lot of people hadn't really thought about critically, maybe. I'm not really sure. But Ray Dalio's book is really, really interesting. I don't necessarily agree with it. In the same way that I don't agree with everything that Balaji says around the network state, which is an essay that had come out, as I had said, in November 2021. And what it really says is, quote, a network state is a social network with an agreed upon leader, an integrated cryptocurrency, a definite purpose, a sense of national consciousness, and a plan to crowdfund territory. And so the idea is that it's more geodesic distance derived than geographic. And so just because I'm here and you're in Austin doesn't mean that we can't be a part of the same nation state, or network state, I should say. So it's really about the fact that we are made very, very close by virtue of the fact that the internet exists, than by virtue of the fact that we're thousands of miles apart from one another. So I think that the value really is derived from the fact that the internet allows and enables for this sort of next iteration of sort of like a community, which is really interesting. I think that like it's sort of the presupposition is that the American experiment was like started in 1776 and it was a radical idea, new governance, public organization came together really effectively. It became really, really like prosperous and organizationally extremely influential. Even though the United States gets a really bad rap, rightfully so. We've been very aggressive geopolitically and when it comes to instigating different things and whether or not we take credit for those things, like Ecuador in the 60s. There are really interesting things that have happened historically in the United States that maybe we don't speak about too broadly, but are relatively well known now in retrospect. Not all of them are great, but many of the trends that we've seen have been net positives to the world, and ultimately it's extremely influential. Far from perfect, I guess is what I'm trying to say, but we're highly respected globally, like with a grain of salt, I guess. But Balaji suggests that we improve that system with influence from what the internet is. And so he just thinks that like we're at a place that's somewhat stagnant. It's not very effective. It's actually really sort of it's not really a meritocracy. It's very corrupt. And he thinks that this transparency that's provided through blockchain technology, which is enabled by the internet, could improve those processes. So that's a long, like probably 5-10 minutes of me just speaking straight, but like, does that make sense? Like, I'm not sure.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Okay.
It seems like has a very vested interest in blockchain tech, early adopter, somebody who truly understands the ability of. I mean, we talked last week about real world application of smart contracts. Like he understands how you can do governance on chain and use digital assets to make decisions together and use it for real world applications.
Exactly.
And I agree. Like one of the things that we encounter in our space is talking to people across borders and holding the same assets as people across borders, and we all have best interests, so it makes sense to me for sure.
Yeah, I think that the hyperinflation piece is something that's interesting in that I think it's a relatively simple concept, and that might be like famous last words that no one cares about because no one listens to us. But the hyperinflation as an idea is like the Federal Reserve prints money in the United States, and that printing of that money is something that is like not really thought of as something that has consequences. It's just something that is ultimately that fiscal policy, that monetary sort of like that liquidity that's injected into the economy is not really necessarily like sort of thought of as a negative thing. In sort of like Keynesian economics, it's like part of the model is that the government intervenes, the Fed intervenes. The Federal Reserve is a part of the government, and that gives them the right to kind of help people through these like social programs like Social Security or Medicare and things like that. Or even during just post Great Depression in the United States in the 20s, what was the name of that program that was implemented that allowed for a lot of the building of the infrastructure across the United States? The Great. Do you know what I'm referencing? What was it called?
I do, but I don't know the name of it.
I forget the name of it. Gosh. Regardless. I'll think of it. but nonetheless, there are many schools of thought with economists, and many of them are kind of cuckoo. But the other one that's like really, really interesting from my perspective, at least as somebody who's interested in Bitcoin, is Austrian economics. And Austrian economics is much more about free market and open trade, and not necessarily printing money. And I think that Bitcoin really falls within that bucket. And I think that there's sort of a conflation between libertarians and Austrian economics. Libertarians is a political view, and Austrian economics is a model of economics. It's not a political view to be interested in Austrian economics. It's like being interested in biology. Maybe people won't like that analogy, but I think it's more in tune with that than it is being affiliated with a political party. Libertarians do happen to sometimes like Austrian economics just because there's a fixed money supply, and it's much more about sort of individual actions as opposed to sort of coercion from like an entity that sort of is like making things happen without something that's intervening as opposed to letting the free market sort of like do its own thing. The printing of money from the Federal Reserve is an action that has been taken like many times in the history of the United States, especially once we removed the gold standard, which was in the 70s under Nixon's purview, President Nixon. And I mean, this is a really long history, and it's not really even really that interesting. I mean, I think it's fascinating, but ultimately it's not like super riveting. Ultimately, what that allowed for us to do is remove the gold. Like literally, dollars were backed 1-to-1 with gold, like gold bullion, like actual bullion, however you say that. I don't even know, but like literal physical gold in safes. And that was that sort of peg, so to speak, was removed. And that allows for people to then, or the United States, which was at that time a world power, still is a world power, to sort of call the shots. And that's a really, really interesting idea that plays into the whole Chinese narrative that Ray Dalio was reporting, and also China Inc. had spoken a lot about, is the fact that a lot of the companies own United States debt, and like that's the way that our Keynesian economics has a lot to do with rehypothecating of debt, whereas Austrian economics is a little bit more maybe conservative in that sense. It doesn't really rehypothecate debt. It's not necessarily true always, but in general, those like the schools of thought they kind of bifurcate in that sense around that idea. And so I think that when it comes to we saw a lot of monetary stimulus, a lot of money printing during COVID. Everybody had gotten those stimulus checks. I did not get a stimulus check, but I remember my roommate did at the time. And it's interesting. What do you do with that money? Like Bitcoin pumped, a lot of these cryptocurrencies pumped because people didn't like. We weren't able to go outside. It was interesting to see what had happened as a result of that. But there's a lot more money introduced to the system, and that's not necessarily people that's not something that necessarily people are thinking of as a critical thing or a negative thing, as much as it's like, oh, great, good, I got my money. When you print more money, though, the supply of the dollars, the number of dollars in existence goes up, and the money, like the number in your bank account, doesn't necessarily go up in correlation. And so what that means is that the money that you have in your bank account as X is now a smaller fraction of the actual total supply. And what that means is that the value is a little bit less. And so that it's really that at a general understanding, is that simple. If you were being, if the supply was fixed and you had a certain amount, then you would want for, your value would stay there. When this number goes up, this number doesn't necessarily go up correlatedly or correspondingly. And so your value goes down. I think it's really that simple.
Yeah.
Hyperinflation is when it happens at an extremely high rate. I'm sorry?
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong. And part of the impetus of all this is all the bank collapse we're seeing, are banks that have debt that they can't fill. If people make bank runs on a number of banks right now, they actually don't have the assets because they bought treasury bonds in the past 2 years that were long term, and then interest rates went up, and now they hypothetically can't cover consumer deposits, right?
Exactly. So interestingly, with Silicon Valley Bank collapsing, did we talk about that much last week? Just remind me.
I don't think so.
Yeah, it's funny.
Did we talk about it at all? Yeah.
I don't know if we did. I'm just pulling.
I think we briefly at the beginning, but
okay, cool. Okay, so I pulled up an article. My understanding of that, I spoke to my sister about this when I was doing laundry last week in the laundromat. It's funny how weird memories stick with you, but excuse me. With Silicon Valley Bank, they're a bank that was servicing a lot of small tech companies, not necessarily all like software engineering companies, but a lot of med tech as well. And then also cryptocurrencies. They were banking a lot of crypto native companies, which is interesting, but like somewhat puts a target on their back, because when you really think about it, Bitcoin, not these other governance tokens like Ethereum, but Bitcoin is an alternative to fiat currency. It has a fixed supply. It's more of an Austrian model, and it allows for you to preserve if it's internet native money that's peer-to-peer by nature and doesn't have a centralized authority, that's directly in competition with something that is centrally governed by a Federal Reserve like the United States dollar. Whether or not we think that the United States cares about that, I think is erroneous, because in reality it's a competitor, in the same way that the yen is or the euro is. The United States doesn't like for those others to be on par with it, right? It wants to be the one. It's done a very good job of that in general with those others, and it's doing the same with the United States. I'm sorry, with Bitcoin in general. I don't necessarily think that that's a hot take. I think it's very logical. But when it comes to the shutting down of SVB, what had actually happened, like the interest rates have been sort of like, I like macro, but I don't necessarily like the monetary policy. Like money's kind of boring, especially because it's so corrupted. But in general, there's been all these interest rate hikes in recent months. Everybody loves to talk about it in the crypto space because it directly affects price action, because retail investors are so stupid, and like all these day traders are just so dumb, and like all they care about are these like silly narratives that they make up. So they've been watching all those meetings and like sort of like pretty much gambling on like whether or not the interest rates are going to continue to increase or decrease, and which effectively makes money and like lending of money more or less expensive. SVB, so Silicon Valley Bank, had taken deposits from organizations, and they incentivize organizations, like every bank does, to give them money, because if you give me your money, then I'll give you loans. Like the more you give, the more loans I'll give you. It's really that simple. It's like, scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. Banks like Citibank, we did talk about it because actually I mentioned somebody who texted me and said, "Oh yeah, you call like, that's cool, you shouted us out." But they had said that like they were able to get their money out in time, which is obviously a relief as a friend, and also I'm sure a real relief for them. But what Silicon Valley Bank had done is a lot of those deposits, when they were actually halted once my buddy got hers out, many others weren't able to. They were actually frozen, and then subsequently Silicon Valley Bank pretty much defaulted on those loans and was saying, we don't have any left. And where did that money go? It's not like they pull the Sam Bankman-Fried and we're committing fraud, which is completely different. That dude's a fucking fraudster. Oh man, I just had to hold myself back from being really nasty. But what Silicon Valley Bank had done is they had bought 10-year treasuries. They had bought long-term treasuries, which is a very, very safe bet when you look at thinking about purchasing them from the United States government. When those treasuries actually, if they buy them at $100 and then now they're like, those interest rates have increased, the value of them is actually lower. So they're like buying them back at $60 and they don't have it's not liquid assets. And so people are trying to pull out their money, and their money's locked up in these 10-year bonds, or treasuries. And so what actually happens is there's just like the balance sheet doesn't work, and so they're not able to provide that. And the government stepped in and said, okay, we'll save you. And they did that for several banks, and they shut them down, and they said, okay, we'll cover the losses, because ultimately, we're the Treasury. What they're actually doing though behind the scenes is really interesting. I read an article by another really big figure in the space who I love to read. I read everything he writes. He's somewhat of a controversial figure. Arthur Hayes. So he wrote an essay last week in response to all of this, just like explaining how it works, and it's absolutely fascinating. And I'll provide a link to it. And it's actually going to be referenced several times in some things that I'm writing about this. But he really was very, very critical. I've got all my notes here about it. Ultimately what he's saying is that like it seems as though they're like saving people, but in reality what they're doing is they're just like printing a ton of money, trillions of dollars, in an effort to sort of save this. And that printing of trillions of dollars is going to actually lead to greater inflation at a higher rate, but it will be under the guise of growth, and actual sort of like plethora of money in the system, and that allows for people to actually like be greedy in a way that they haven't been recently. They're going to actually stop with their fiscal policy that's more conservative, allow for it to be a little bit more free, with lower, potentially not increasing the interest rates any longer, and just sort of like under the guise of being very sort of like stimulating to the economy, when in reality in the long term it's a detrimental move potentially.
Yeah. So basically, we spent like 10 months, or no, over a year of raising interest rates to try and get the economy back on track, and then now a bunch of banks have the potential to go under, so we're printing money to bail them out.
Exactly.
Right? Is that like
Pretty much. I think that ultimately there's a lot of like, not necessarily conspiracy, but really interesting ideas around like whether or not those banks were targeted because of the types of clients that they take, when in reality, like there are a lot of medical technology. Like the United States is backed on entrepreneurship, right? It's like when I was in Dubai, like the vast majority, I was one of maybe 2 or 3 Americans of 40 people who were there, which is really refreshing. And but the United States is really like, it's a place of freedom of thought, entrepreneurship. It's still, there's a really, really important role for the United States to play. And I think that it's really well respected from that regard, publicly, with like smart people around the world. And so I don't necessarily know that like it's that simple that it's like we're going to see hyperinflation, because in reality, a lot of debt globally between countries is denominated in the United States dollar. When you go to Panama, you're using the United States dollar. When you go to Costa Rica right now, you can use the United States dollar. You can also use Bitcoin in Costa Rica. But then more importantly, also when you're in Zambia, the United States dollar is traded on the black market. I bought dollars. I sold an iPhone in the back of a car once to a ruby trader, like a gem trader. It's a crazy story, but he bought them for USD cash, which he had in his pocket. Like people have USD because that's a global currency to a lot of people. So that's not going to change overnight. That's not it has too large a hold on the global economy at large for it to have this hyperinflation in the same way that it happens in Argentina, which is devastating. And I don't mean to say that that's not devastating, but it has a much lesser effect when it happens in Argentina, only because Argentina is not the global power that the United States is. And the United States dollar is much more prolific and prevalent globally than it is than the I'm not sure if it's Argentinian peso or what the name of the currency had been. Bolivar? Yeah, that's in Venezuela. That's another example of ridiculous rampant inflation. And a lot of what's going on in Venezuela is actually happening in United States dollar on the streets. I know that that's very true. I realize I'm just like sort of like word vomiting at you. I don't want to, but I love this. This is like one of my favorite things to think and talk about.
You're passionate about it.
Yeah, I love it. It's like so interesting.
Yeah, well, to go back to the beginning too, this 90-day window where we could go from, having a stable U.S. dollar to like crazy hyperinflation, and it seems to me the way that he's describing it is these things generally happen fast in history. But I don't know if they've happened fast to a global reserve currency like the U.S. dollar. So
that's a good point.
It seems like a really intense prediction to make on that short of a timeline about something that would have ramifications and be, send shockwaves through countries all around the world.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of my point to my buddy this morning. Is I was trying to assuage his concern, and he had said like I got it. I'd written to him pretty much like a very succinct version, or maybe a little much less coherent, or maybe more. I don't know. Maybe just as incoherent of like a. These are some resources that I would encourage you to take a look at. Like, don't necessarily read Ray Dalio's book. It's not like a sit down and read it for 20 minutes. It's like took me like a month to read it, but. You just search in Google or YouTube or whatever and check out, if you're actually interested, read Arthur Hayes. He's a fun read. I mean, like I said, I have them on my iPad. I love this, like reading through them. He has a very, very casual tone. He uses a lot of curse words and is very, he's a black dude and he really sort of, it feels as though the way, and I think I love this take. He feels as though the way that SBF has been treated is extremely inequitable to the way that he had been treated on the global stage when he was in controversy. And I think that's. I mean, I remember when that had happened, and I think that has proven very true to me, at least. He was on a podcast 2 weeks ago talking about just that, and I really thought it was courageous, but not even really courageous as much as just like that is so obvious, and I'm surprised more people don't talk about it. But Arthur Hayes' articles is honestly pretty technical. He's like a gigabrain economist, and I share him with a bunch of my hedge fund buddies, and not all of them like him because he can come off a little bit brash, and he's kind of like giving the middle finger to a lot of hedge fund guys. But he's still, those are the key friends he keeps, and like the circles he runs in, and so he constantly is bringing in different opinions from those sorts of things. But he's a little bit of like an antagonist. But why was I talking about Arthur Hayes? I forget. I'm sorry.
I don't remember where it started. We were talking about the
sorry.
fact that it could happen so fast.
Oh yeah, well that exactly, and so I'd sent him these resources to my buddy, and I just said like, oh yeah, like if you're actually interested, these are some things. He said, well, yeah, I gotta educate myself, and I said, well, in reality, if this happens, I wouldn't worry about educating yourself. Like then it's too late. I think go buy a gun or something. Like like things are gonna be really bad. Like if there's hyperinflation in the United States in the next 90 days, the world will like hypothetically end. Like it'll be so different from what it is that we like. I just went to the grocery store. I got my hair cut. Like a lot of people have no idea that this bet exists. They like even though there is this money printing happening, the global masses have no idea. Like it doesn't matter to them. Like they're still able to like trade a couple bucks back and forth, and like maybe their pizza's $1.50 instead of $1 now. When I was at the getting my haircut, like they've got a TV on with like the trashy TV, and it's like, oh, Joe's Pizza famously no longer $1, now it's $1.50, and it's like inflation, and it's like. That's like, sure, people feel that. People feel groceries getting expensive. People are always telling me eggs are more expensive and stuff. And like, yeah, I mean, it's the same for all of us. I understand that. I live in New York City. My rent is exorbitant, and it has been for a very long time, and it doesn't get any cheaper. But I do think that people just live their lives and don't really care. And if this bet comes to fruition, which I think we both agree is like, it's more of a meme than it is an actual bet. I don't think Balaji is sitting somewhere right now like battening down the hatches and buying canned beans, because that would be, I think, the best, most rational action if he's actually concerned with this.
Yeah.
It just doesn't seem realistic to me. And this is the sort of thing that like a bad comedy movie, like a zombie apocalypse movie, starts with, is us like on a podcast and no one listens to, be like, oh, never gonna happen, and then it's like happens.
Yeah. I mean, I think the reality is if the U.S. dollar was inflated that much, our lives would change. The money that you have that's in savings will be way less valuable, which is kind of why he wants to make this bet and make a big meme out of it, is that he truly believes that the reason that they're going to print more money to bail out banks, hypothetically, is based on a flawed system, and he sees decentralized systems like Bitcoin as a solution to that, and he's really trying to rally the troops around. This should be the last time that we, allow the Fed to print this much for banks that are run by people who still are going to get bonuses this year.
Yeah, exactly.
Like the 2008 financial crisis was something that created this entire space, and I think he's really trying to get those who are, who have a belief that a systemic change could come from another sort of financial collapse or a longer term recession. Mm-hmm. He's trying to get those people on board, and I agree with him in that regard. Mm-hmm. Like, the fact that the U.S. economy is at the will of people who clearly don't care and can make it out all right, even if they fuck up everything, is
Yeah.
uh, not cool
Yeah,
for
absolutely.
the layperson. So yeah, I'm not putting all my money in Bitcoin though.
Not
I still
today.
buy $4 a day. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. You buying $4 a day, I think is like it's exemplary of the fact that you understand what the issue is, but it's also realistic in the idea that this is not the apocalypse and it's unrealistic. I think it's unreasonable to assume that it is. That's sort of the point that I'm making. Yeah, I guess in summary, it's like I could not agree more with the premise. I think it's brilliant
yeah,
marketing for us, like people like me who love this stuff. And I think that the fact that my buddy texted me is great. Like that shows me that like how extensively public this discourse is. Um,
yeah,
and so I think it's great. But ultimately, I think that this sort of change, the United States, I'd love to, the freedoms that I'm afforded are as a result of the United States. And so it's not like I'm rooting against the U.S. I do think that there's place in the world for more than one currency. And I don't necessarily know that there should be one that's issued by a government that's like, flexed a lot of power in negative ways, also a lot of positive ways. I think that this is very nuanced and a fun conversation to have. And I don't think, I'm not trying to like, I just think it's fun to talk about, and I don't think a lot of people like to talk about it, and that's sort of weird to me. Like these should be parts of public discourse. We should talk about these things with a critical and interested eye, curious eye. That's what's going to lead us to a better place. Not just like assuming that there's some dude who understands it better. That's the premise of the movie The Wizard of Oz, and he's just a dude behind a curtain. I think it's really that simple, which might be naive to some people, but I keep getting older, and I keep kind of coming back to that, which is interesting. But yeah, it's a fun topic of conversation. I don't necessarily think that the United States is in a position, despite the fact that they're inflating the dollar. There's really no two ways about that. I'm not sure if we said that out loud, but the dollar is becoming inflated without a doubt. There's no two ways about it. This spending last week, the stimulus is actually more than the COVID stimulus by like 20 million or something like that. It's like 4.3 trillion instead of 4.1 trillion, something like that, which is really, really interesting. Those are such large numbers. It's like very, very difficult for me to wrap my head around them, but it's a very large amount of money.
Maybe a good time to buy some chickens
Because of eggs? Is that what you mean?
in preparation. Yeah, 2 years from now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's why like these billionaires years ago were like, I'm sure they still are, like famously buying properties on New Zealand, like bunkers in New Zealand.
Yeah.
I just like, I mean, if the world is ending, there's gonna be a lot of people who want to party, and I'm not gonna be the one to like go into a bunker. I'm gonna be the one out there partying with all the people. Like you gotta make the most of it. I woke up.
I've not read enough dystopian novels yet.
I love sci-fi. I spent a lot of time reading about sci-fi.
Yeah.
But so I was on the plane. This is the last thing I'll say. I was on the plane the other day, and I was flying to Dubai, and it's like a 12-hour flight there and 13 and a half back. But I woke up, I like stayed up all night the night before, went to bed like 11 in the morning on the flight, and then like woke up, I'm not sure what time it was, but I'd slept for at least 4 or 5 hours. Woke up in a dream that the plane was going down, but I wasn't sure that it was fake yet. And so I had to like act calm in my seat. And I thought that I had heard the engine explode. The pilot explained what had happened, talk about how we're going down, but he's gonna be able to land us in the ocean. And like I woke up to this and I was like, wow. So do I call my mom? Like, what do I do? Like, what do I actually do right now? Like, I can't. I just was thinking about like, I think I'm gonna call my mom. And then I like looked up and I like realized like, oh, wait, like no one's panicking. That can't be real. Like, if everybody would be going nuts if that was real.
Yeah, people would be sweating.
Yeah, they'd be going wild. And so I realized pretty quickly that it was okay. But it was like to have that moment of thought, like a panic-stricken thought. It's like, oh my gosh, am I really? This is the way it's going to happen on a trip to like a random work trip? Like, no, what a bummer. I want to die in a motorcycle accident or something cool. I want to get eaten by a shark. I want to get eaten by a shark or something cool. Oh god, yeah. But so yeah, I just was thinking like, okay, if it's gonna end, what are you gonna do? Are you gonna go to a bunker in New Zealand? Or are you gonna go party it up, call your mom, and be like, yeah, what's up? I love you. Yeah.
Call your mom, people.
Exactly. All right, cool. I feel like that was. I was like, oh yeah, all right, we'll do a quick episode, 20 minutes. God damn, too chatty.
You're an animal.
Chatty Chuck.
Yeah.
Do you have any hot takes?
Yeah, I have a spicy take. Mine are always so like fucking
I love it.
white bread.
What do you got?
But You might know that I make jalapeno water,
Yes.
which is jalapenos boiled in water, makes your water spicy.
Yeah.
I got a juicer for my birthday,
Nice.
and I've been making jalapeno lemonade. So here's a quick recipe. I'll keep it short.
Wow.
You use a juicer. You juice either a lemon or a lime into a mason jar. You put like 1 to 2 tablespoons of sugar, and then you make a big pot. Like cut up 2 jalapenos, put it in a pot full of water, boil it for 10 minutes. When it cools down, pour it in the mason jars with the lemon or lime juice and the sugar, and then you shake it up. Boom, you got it.
Wow, that sounds so good.
Yeah, it's like sweet and spicy. It's pretty solid.
Wow, that's epic. What a great gift. Did Maddie get you that?
Now it's from my mom.
Oh, that's
It's a
great.
Snag juicer. It's the fanciest appliance I have now.
Wow, crazy. That's awesome.
Yeah, I don't know.
Nice. Jeez. Wow, that made me really thirsty. um,
I'd give you one if I could.
yeah, I definitely would come have one.
Yeah, what's your hot take?
I don't know, man. I think that one hot take that I have is not. This is like the least hot take thing ever. I guess I'm like really cooling down after the Malcolm Gladwell rant I went on. But I did some laundry today at a laundromat because I don't have laundry in the sublet in Brooklyn, and it's like you and I did laundry together in college all the time. We would like wear like basketball jerseys and stuff intentionally because we're like, oh, we gotta like look cool. Like I don't remember why we did that, but I remember specifically talking about that and wearing like a Derrick Rose jersey like back in, I don't even know, but but I was in there today, and I live in Little Jamaica, which is a great neighborhood. There's a lot of jerk chicken and spicy food, and it's so fun being in there. It's owned by like a Chinese woman and her husband who's speaking in Mandarin the whole time, and then there's all these women in there who are speaking with thick Jamaican accents at one another, pretty much yelling at each other, but they're all like buddies. And it's really easy if you just close your eyes and like listen, you might think that they're actually about to get in a fist fight, but in reality they're like laughing and sort of like hanging out and just being kind of like a little bit like antagonistic to each other in a friendly way. But like I kind of stood out in there. I'm a dude, and also I'm very white, and but I was in there drinking coffee, kind of hanging, like taking notes on Balaji and stuff, like just kind of prepping for this and thinking about it. I was like in and out of the place, going into the sun and back, and I kept like running into the same woman. Like she like had got like she wanted to wash her clothes near where I was doing it for whatever reason. I'd been there first, so I like put it in, and like she was like kind of giving me a hard time. And then I like opened up a dryer and I walked over there, and like everybody's got the baskets, but they keep them to themselves. Like they're public, but they're not for Charles because they're for all these people who want them, and like called them or whatever. And so I like carried all my stuff. I dropped some socks on the walk over. Like I'm getting ready to throw them in there. She like immediately appears and like wants to throw her stuff in there. I was like, oh, I mean you can have it. She's like, no, you got it, darling. And it's like, oh my god. So I think it's like, and I for a long time was very like hesitant to go into the laundromat just because I was so spoiled the last few years. I've had my own washer dryer and unit, so you can wash anything you want whenever you want. But it's been really fun to like become a little part of this little laundromat around the corner I've been going to once a week. It's like it's very fun to like to to kind of get people to talk shit to you in person in a very playful way. I really like that.
Yeah, I dig it, man. That's a good hot take.
Yeah. Go get someone to talk shit to you, I guess is the hot take.
Yeah, go to your laundry. Don't even do your laundry. Go to your laundromat and just hang out.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
that's awesome. Nice, man. All right, well, shout out to Josiah Soren for NFT Leopards, Lo-Fi Leopards, an NFT project on Avalanche. And what else? Any other parting thoughts?
No, I think that's it, man. See you next week. Hopefully hyperinflation doesn't happen.
Yeah, let's hope. We got how many units of 7 days do we have for like 90-ish days? So we'll have plenty of podcasts to talk about it.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, man. Sweet. Talk to you next week. Ciao.